Hi, I'm Heidi Otway, your host for this Conversation on Cannabis virtual forum brought to you by the Medical Marijuana Education and Research Initiative at Florida A&M University. In this conversation, we're talking about marijuana use and your heart health. So let's talk and learn about this subject from our guest expert. Dr. Annabelle Morgan is a scientist, educator, and author. She is a cell and developmental biologist with a focus on cardio oncology. She is internationally known for her work on pharmaceutical innovation and clinical trial research in medical cannabis. Dr. Annabelle, welcome to the forum.
Thank you for having me, Heidi, and the whole team. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you. It's good to have you on the show. To everyone joining us on this live forum, please share, post, and tag a friend on Facebook to have them join us on this conversation. If you're on YouTube, share the link so others can join us as well. During the forum, we want you to send us your questions in the comment box, and we'll do our best to have Dr. Annabelle answer them. We also want you to tell us what you think about this forum by completing the survey that will be posted in the comments on YouTube and Facebook after the live program. Your name will be entered into a drawing on March 9th, 2023 to win a $100 gift card provided by one of Mary's partners. Now let's start this conversation on cannabis. Dr. Annabelle, you're a scientist and a developmental biologist. What prompted your interest in medical cannabis?
Well, before I'm all of that, I'm a mother. And while I was working in cell and developmental biology, as you said, my focus was on cardiac health. After we get chemotherapies, what are the cardiotoxic effects? I had my third child during that time. And my son was born and was having seizures uncontrollably as a result of a stroke as a newborn baby. So he had a stroke, he had uncontrollable seizures, and your life changes at that point. After being in the hospital for 5 weeks, my son Macario had 38% of his brain removed. So he's missing all of his left brain, left occipital lobe, temporal lobe. So as you can imagine, he was predicted to be very mentally challenged, paralyzed the right side of his body, never eat on his own, never talk on his own. And as a mother and not a doctor at that time, I just kind of trusted in the process. Now, his surgery was the first time that particular surgery was ever done. So it was really difficult to know what his outcome would be. The surgery was, again, at 5 weeks old, so just short of a 2-month-old baby. When he turned 6 months old, I just had a moment where I was looking at him and he was not developing. He was no different than a newborn baby. And as a desperate mother would, I just started to search for alternatives. But being a scientist, my search is probably a little different than Facebook and Google. I was looking for peer-reviewed journals. And just like today, the research on cannabis, there was very little, but it was very promising in a sense. When you think about the ability of the brain to compensate for areas that are not connecting well. When you think about neuroplasticity, I mean, we are really amazing when you think about our body's ability to heal. And as a young child to develop, I just thought, wow, well, maybe I should try cannabis on my son. So that was a whole journey in itself that took a lot of scientific innovation, scientific studying. And a month later, I had developed CBD for my son, told nobody, and started just pumping it in his G tube, replaced all neurological medications he was on, and immediately started seeing results in 2 days to where he was moving his eyes around. He started moving around, not favoring left over right. And by 14 months old, he was walking, talking, eating. And today he's 7, and he's no different than any other 7-year-old. He has no developmental deficits. He's still missing 40% of his brain. And because of that blessing, I just feel like it's my duty now to be invested in the research when it comes to cannabis and be invested in understanding its mechanisms so that we can have more stories like my son Macario's.
That's amazing. And it's my understanding that you've actually written a book about that experience.
Yes, so February 7th of this year, I published with Forbes Books. The book is called Mighty Flower: How Cannabis Saved My Son.
Mhm.
And it's about the truth. It's about my journey, what I went through, but it's really about the need that we have in researching cannabis, and how the history of cannabis is there, but we need the science to be able to drive it forward so that we can help more people.
Yeah. Well, let's kind of shift gears and talk about all of the research that has been coming out over the last couple of weeks. I mean, I've been reading story after story that's talking about various studies coming out about cannabis use and heart health, which kind of falls into your area of expertise. And recently, the American Heart Association released a study that shows an increasing number of people under 50 who use cannabis are having heart attacks. How is cannabis use contributing or causing heart health issues?
That's a very long answer. I think it's important to note that the research that we are doing in cannabis is observational. The safety and efficacy that we really want to dive into is we're not able to do because of the worldwide legality issues. And of course, the American Heart Association and the CDC, they do address that we're not able to perform the proper research that can really tell us the true story of how cannabis use, and especially daily cannabis use, is contributing to heart disease. But overall, in younger people, more and more since 2012, more and more younger people under the age of 50 are presented in the emergency rooms having heart attacks. And those reasons acutely aren't necessarily due to cannabis.
Okay.
So, there's a lot of genetics there. Cholesterol is a really big thing. But the general answer to your question as to how cannabis is contributing to it raises the heart rate very rapidly. We're having blood vascular issues, and we're seeing this, but we're again not able to define this. We're taking 800,000 odd patients and really making predictions based on the trends. About 4%. I mean, for that particular study that the American Heart Association came out about, it was 4% of 800 and some thousand patients under the age of 50 that had heart attacks that were utilizing cannabis more so on the daily basis. But here are some really important questions. What were they using? How were they using it? Right? A lot of street marijuana today is laced. There was a study that came out last week about how they're finding poison inside some of the cannabis. Even cannabis that we're finding in the dispensaries, even though it's getting better, we're seeing a lot of duplicate certificate of analyses. And so a big question there is, okay, if it is people that are smoking, because of course there's different ways to utilize cannabis,
Right.
then what exactly are they using? And then the second huge thing that we need to understand is, did they have underlying susceptibility to have a heart attack? Is it in their genes? Are they overweight? Do they also use alcohol? What other drugs was it maybe a result of drug interactions? So, there's a lot of gaps that need to be filled before we can say, yes, for sure, cannabis use is harmful to the heart. I think what we do have is an opportunity to maybe get more funding and open the door for doing more research, because we are seeing a correlation of some regard there.
A lot of the studies link smoking cannabis to heart health. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, that those are acute myocardial infarctions, which basically mean, again, somebody can be smoking, overdoing it. Now, we don't know of any true cases of overdosing marijuana, but there's over 500 cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids in a cannabis flower. So what are we smoking? And cannabis plant flower today, is way more potent, way stronger than it was 20, 30 years ago. It's not as natural and as organic as we want to think. It's really serving the recreational space. And
Mhm.
so, again, it's a call to regulate, because what we think is natural and organic and what we're smoking, and you think about the kids, we may not know if it's actually a chemical or the combustion of that chemical. You can look back to cigarette smoking, and why is smoking so much worse, supposedly, than eating something like cannabis? It's because it's the cuteness of it. It's
Mhm.
immediate, and there's a lot of other trace combustible particulate components that can come out of smoking that we have to worry about. And so we don't necessarily know if it is the cannabis itself.
Right. Would that also apply to vaping? Because for medical cannabis users, they can also vape. Would that also apply to vaping of medical
So
cannabis?
vaping is such a controversial, the whole e-cigarette vaping
Mhm.
space. It's so controversial because, again, it's not regulated, so we don't know how well it's being done. I could sit here
Mhm.
and say, yeah, you're better off vaping, but which vape pen are you going to buy? And which cartridge are you going to, what's in that cartridge
Mhm.
that you're going to put inside of that vape pen? So that's why organizations like Mary need to come out with educational information and maybe certify certain products that are specifically for the patient, so that we can feel confident in
Mhm.
what they're actually smoking, right? And so there's some physician councils come up, but everybody's looking for that kind of education to just know your cannabis if you're utilizing it, mostly for neurological benefits.
Mhm.
But in the heart, and with vaping, studies are coming out just as readily as you're seeing cannabis affecting the heart. Studies are
Mhm.
coming out on the constituents and the particulate matter being very toxic, very cardiotoxic.
Mhm.
And again, does that mean you stop doing it and you don't? I mean, at the end of the day, you're going to drink that glass of wine if you want to. The frequency of it is important, but most importantly, it's knowing where you're getting it from. That's really going to allow us to understand how true this data is.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that, for Mary, they would probably bring on more subject matter experts like yourself to kind of talk more about the depth of the research that you referenced earlier. So just want to clarify that. We are getting some questions from our audience, and Stacy Gansert said she'd be super interested in research with heart patients. Is there such research out there that you are aware of, Dr. Annabelle?
So, not really. Not with cannabis, and not yet. I think, again, this large database study
Mhm.
that the American Heart Association wrote a statement on, I think it calls for there to be research. Those studies are called observational pilot data studies, and those are what we kind of need to be able to apply for. Inpatient, you actually utilizing patients and having a more controlled setting.
Yeah.
So there isn't right now, but I do want to highlight that I'm really excited that there is research on cardiac myocytes coming out.
Okay, tell us
Like
about
I
that.
told you before the show, Heidi, so at Vanderbilt, we work with single cells. So the cardiac myocytes are the single cells of the heart.
Mhm.
And when you think of the heart muscle, you have millions of those tiny cardiac cells, and they have to be synchronous in order for us to have a heartbeat. When
Right.
you can break them down and see them as a single cell and see how they react on their own, because they're not as strong on their own, we can really get an idea of their deficiencies. And I would love to see what cannabis can do to the single heart cell. There was a study that came out, I think, just last year, from a group in London, and they were looking at THC directly and THC metabolites
Mhm.
directly on cardiac myocytes, and they were finding that in the different dosing, that it was causing for the heart cells to actually be healthy and happy. But as they increased that dosing, they were seeing that the cells would just die. There would be morphology change. And
Mm.
so they kind of leaned on, well, that means that cannabis is probably toxic. We're looking at a heart cell in a dish. It's going to die eventually
Right.
anyways. So again, it's really hard to tell. But an in vitro study, which is looking at cells in a dish, is a gateway also to being able to study in animals and then moving on into humans. So hopefully we'll be able to study it in humans very soon.
Yeah. When you started the show, you talked about how you came up with a form of cannabis for your son, right? And then you just referenced people need to know what's in their cannabis. So can you talk a little bit about how folks can determine, okay, what's in your cannabis, and then how might that affect you? Because here in Florida, recreational adult use cannabis is illegal, but we do have dispensaries where folks can get a medical marijuana card and actually get it for the qualifying conditions. So it'd be good if you could just share how someone, you talked about the certificate of
Analysis.
analysis. Can you
Certificate of
talk a little
analysis,
bit about
yeah.
that? So, and then I want to kind of segue into, well, how does that impact what the other pharmaceuticals you may be taking for, other health issues? So the interactions, drug interactions.
Yeah, so luckily in Florida specifically, cannabis has been around for a while now, legally for medical patients, and there are doctors jumping on board. One of my really good friends, Dr. Sophia Lynn, has her own practice where she focuses specifically on medical cannabis for patients, where medical cannabis really bridges that gap between natural meds and pharmaceutical medications, because in order for you to get the best benefit of medical cannabis, it needs to be personalized. The way you and your tolerance for cannabis, Heidi, is going to be completely different than mine. And
Mhm.
what something like a CBD does for you is probably going to be completely different for me. So our makeups are all different, and this is something that we need to start addressing more in medicine in general. But as
Yeah.
a patient that's interested in cannabis for medicine, of course, you want to look to your dispensary, to your doctor. There's a lot of great doctors now, a lot of great
There's
pharmacists in
2,000
Florida.
Florida. Yeah.
Yeah, that can guide you, that can educate you, that can shift you once you go back to them and say, "Oh no, I had a bad evening with that one." And ultimately, this is all data for us so that we can understand the cannabis more. But
Right.
something as simple as looking at a certificate of analysis after you spoke to your doctor and your doctor says, okay, I think you should try, if it's for sleep, for instance, okay, I think you should try a 1-to-1 ratio of CBD to THC to get your
Mhm.
heart rate down and so that you can relax and that you can sleep. So
Mhm.
then you go to the dispensary and you say, I need a 1-to-1. As soon as they present it to you, ask for that certificate of analysis. Feel confident in asking for it because by law, they have to present that to you.
Right.
And then look at it and look at the ratios. It's very easy of CBD to THC. And then also pay special attention because if we're talking about smokable flower, there are going to be minor cannabinoids. There are going to be terpenes in there. The
Mhm.
terpenes, especially, are going to alter the way the cannabis smells, which doesn't really matter medically, but could
Yeah.
if you're into aromas. But it's going to affect the way the cannabis makes you feel immediately, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
smoking, you get the effects quite immediately. And then you'll be able to see that, oh, okay, this one might make me a little more tired, and this one might give me a little more energy. And you always start slow. So
Right.
once you've kind of felt good about, and who's this manufacturer? Ask all the questions,
Right.
right?
Right.
Because that is your right. Ask, who is this manufacturer? Oh, they're local. Some great local manufacturers, growers in the state of Florida who have
Mhm.
been doing it now for quite a long time.
Mhm.
So who's the manufacturer? Oh, okay, I'm going to give this a try. And you could feel good that you're trying quality marijuana. And if you don't want to smoke, there's other ways, right? There's tinctures, there's edibles now available on the
Yeah.
market.
Yeah.
Um, and there's capsules. So there,
Mhm.
there are other ways if you don't, but always, always, no matter what delivery, ask for the certificate of analysis, ask which company made it, look at your options as far as ask the people at the dispensary, hey, I've got a pain in my elbow. What are most people using?
Yeah. Mhm.
Ask all the questions in the world. So,
Yeah. What about questions about interactions with other drugs? So you
yes, you asked
have
me
a
that.
qualifying condition, you are given the ability to get cannabis for your qualifying condition, but you may have, you may be taking medicines for your heart. So can you talk about what those interactions could be?
Yeah, definitely talk to your doctor about that. We're talking medically here. So even if you do want to utilize it recreationally and you're on a handful of drugs, talk to your doctor about that. Drug to drug interactions exist. A lot of cannabinoids are metabolized by the liver, so they will actually interact. Sometimes they can enhance or support the drugs you're on, which is a cool thing. Sometimes they can make them overly toxic. So it's important to ask your doctor about that. Ask your pharmacist. Again, if you're in Florida, pharmacists know a lot. And if you're not in Florida, because there are people online that are not from Florida, this is something that you need to look for online education. There is so much information out there now, and really feel confident before you utilize cannabis while taking certain medications.
Hmm. Are there ways for cannabis users to mitigate any risk of having heart issues if they use cannabis?
If you are susceptible to heart disease, or already have a heart condition because of obesity, lifestyle, high anxiety,
Mhm.
diabetes, maybe it's genetics. You have a series of people in your family that have had heart disease. um, you know, Maybe you want to be very cautious about utilizing cannabis daily, first of all. But utilizing cannabis at those really high doses we talked about, it
Mhm.
just it just doesn't make sense, unless you're really trying to be adventurous and seeing how hypnotized you can get. It just doesn't make sense medically to give yourself as much THC as you can. And so
Mm.
being super cautious in a lot of countries, including Canada and Israel, where prescribing medical cannabis has been around for a while, the recommendation is to go slow
Right.
and then titrate up. I mean, it's still the same. And that is because we work in a personalized manner. We work in a precision based manner to where we don't know how cannabis is going to react per patient. And thus, we don't know how cannabis is going to affect individuals' hearts. So
Right.
if you know that you're already susceptible to it, I'm not saying don't use cannabis, but maybe use a tincture.
Mm.
Maybe definitely use something that you know exactly what's in it. Maybe don't smoke cannabis, right? Because you just don't know how the combustion and the particulate of the cannabis is going to affect you.
Right.
And we just really have to be in tune when it comes to using THC in general.
Yeah. Here in Florida, we've seen a lot of shops that are selling the Delta 8s, the Delta 9s, and all these various CBD infused products. Should people be concerned about using those and the impact it could have on their heart?
Absolutely. So there isn't a lot of data or there isn't any data that I know of on edibles and heart health. But heart health is related to every other system in our body,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, you run a whole mile, your heart rate goes up, you're
Right.
sweating, your lungs are moving. So it's all relative. Edibles is probably one of the trickiest deliveries when it comes to cannabis. I think it'll probably be the last, if at all, to be considered a pharmaceutical. I
Mm.
mean, it is just so variable. It hits you. You can't really do the go slow and titrate up and see how you're doing, because it doesn't hit you acutely. It hits you after 30 minutes to an hour. And then by then you're like, oh my gosh, I ate way too much of those,
Go.
chocolates. And then then you become panicked and have high anxiety. And of course your heart rate's going to go up. Of course that's not good for your heart acutely. Um, Long term, I don't know. We really need to be able to utilize all these reports that are going out, to advocate for more research to be done so that we're taking an unbiased approach.
Mhm.
Cannabis saved my son's life. It may harm somebody else. It may cause an addiction in somebody else, but it's the way you use it. It's knowing what you're using, and it's about knowing the patient that is utilizing it as well. So it's really not fair to make a lot of these conclusions without really getting the science done and having the ability to do so.
Dr. Annabelle, we got a number of questions from folks who registered before the show, and I want to ask you, we kind of touched on a lot of the questions that they asked. And one of them was, Tad said he wanted to hear more about studies that involve medical patients using devices as dry herb vaporizers for inhalation. I don't know if that's something you can touch on. And then you did talk about the impact of edible cannabis products on heart health. So you did touch on the second half of his question. So I've never heard of a dry herb vaporizer for inhalation. Is that the same thing as like a vape? Is that vaping essentially?
Yeah, it's essentially vaping it. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there are some where, they're like one hitters, I guess, and like the
Oh,
glass hitters. And there are now electrical ones where you're actually putting flour instead. Yeah, I mean, technology is
wow.
incredible. And some people have really gotten a hold of this stuff and are running with it. And again, that's awesome, but a little scary because we don't understand the combustional analysis that comes out of that. For cigarettes, it took years and we're still learning, I should say decades. And we're still learning the harms and the toxicities, mostly of the constituents that come out of smoking.
Mhm.
Cigarettes, and a lot, I would have to say, are probably similar with marijuana and just the combustible side, not of the compounds of the marijuana itself. I almost feel like we're taking away the ability of cannabis to really heal us when we're utilizing it in the wrong delivery.
Yeah.
Um, you know, there are a few studies. I think one came out this year in 2022, and it focused mostly on the toxicity of e-cigarettes, of vaping, and the difference of dry flower, secondhand smoke. And they did find that there was more toxicity related there. It was a smaller study. A lot of these type of studies, which are observational, you're relying on people just telling you what they've been smoking, how often they've smoked it, and then they come to the hospital and you're trying to gather data that is kind of considered word of mouth. So it's
Right.
really difficult to pin down exactly what could have caused any kind of heart toxicity when it comes to smoking. How often did this person smoke? What else are they using? What kind of drug interactions might there be?
Mhm.
So that's just a really difficult question. I think that where the vaping industry is right now, it took a hard hit a few years ago, and where there were a lot of like single reports coming out that especially kids were getting sick from vaping,
Mhm.
and it's slowly coming back now. I think we need some regulation around vapings, and if not regulation immediately, recommendations
Yeah.
from the FDA directly. If we're going to allow people to sell it, how do we utilize it? And a true statement on how it's different than smoking flower, because it
Mhm.
is different. But
Yeah.
being able to define that and reporting on that, I think we all need that. And so to answer your question, there's no active clinical trials. It's really difficult to go on clinicaltrials.gov and expect to find smoking clinical trials. It's just not the immediate interest. And I think that's changing. I think more and more people need to know because cannabis is available in that form.
Yeah, and we talked a lot about the studies. I mean, again, we keep seeing a lot popping up. What studies would you like to see in addition to the impact of smoking? What other studies, and I know you do this for a living, what other studies would you like to see on cannabis that would help inform our viewers and those who use medical cannabis?
Neurological studies for sure. Then, our brain is connected to our heart as well. And the brain is the mothership of signaling. And that signaling is vital and necessary for the rest of our body to function efficiently and for us to have that homeostasis that cannabis brings. So, any neurological deficits, obviously, it's close to my heart. My son is missing 38% of his brain. But in kids that have autism and ADHD, and in adults that are early onset Parkinson's, dementia, any of those neurological deficits, we need to study that. Because if my son is missing 38% of his brain, and his brain cells were able to rewire, and in his case, compensate for the areas of loss, if another kid has all of their brain and is autistic or has epilepsy, how do we encourage that neuroplasticity? How do we encourage rewiring? How do we encourage the cells to signal more efficiently? That is number one on my plate for studies that need to be done. Just to add to that, I found out just yesterday that billions of dollars for the first time were spent on cannabis research globally. That was really a shock to me. Come to find out, a lot of that research was done in a very biased manner where it was funding negative hypotheses. And that's just, that's just disappointing because cannabinoids have definitely have very, very beneficial abilities and benefits. And if we don't study it, we won't be able to take advantage of it. And so it's important to do these studies to protect people. It's important to do these studies quickly to help people understand what cannabis they should be using or how to source their cannabis. Sure, but to be immediately negative and just try to shut down the opportunity at somebody like my son to be able to heal from cannabis is the wrong way to go about it. And I'm the first person to, even though I've been able to reap the benefits of cannabis within my own family, I'm the first person to say, well, no, hold on. We need to now utilize that awesomeness and do the research and fund the research and get the data, and put that research money wherever those billions of dollars are, put that research money into just the truth, not into finding a negative answer or even a positive one, but just understanding the truth.
Yeah, Dr. Annabelle, you have a very amazing story. And I really want to thank you for being a guest on our show today, just really providing some amazing insights. Is there anything that you'd like to close with for all of our listeners and viewers on this program? We got a number of people that are just really enjoying this conversation.
I'd like to close on making sure that people understand that education is the key to knowledge and it is the key to power. If you're properly educated on something, it's really difficult for anything or anyone to go against you in a negative manner. And the work, science takes a lot of time. So I know that a lot of people that are fans of cannabis and just want to see it get legalized and don't understand what's wrong. Why can't we just legalize this already? The science of it takes time. And in order for us to be able to have specific products for specific conditions, we have to do the science. I also want to leave with telling everybody that there doesn't have to be a divide between the pharmaceutical industry. There doesn't have to be a divide between academia and those of us that love holistic and natural medicine. It's time and place. Almost 90% of pharmaceuticals in the market that are prescribable medications, those active ingredients started as components of a plant. Wow. It's just what we did scientifically to them to make them more targeted, to make them more potent, and to work more actively. And there doesn't have to be a divide for us to advocate for either one of those sides. When we work together, then we can all reap the benefits of all medicine, all technology that would be best for ourselves and for our families. So that's all I wanted to leave with.
Wow, amazing. Dr. Annabelle, thank you so much for being a guest on this Conversation on Cannabis virtual forum brought to you by the Medical Marijuana Education and Research Initiative at Florida A&M University. Thank you to everyone watching this program. Tell us what you think about this forum by completing the survey that will be posted in the comment boxes on YouTube and Facebook after this live program. If you complete the survey, your name will be entered into a drawing on March 9th, 2023 to win a $100 gift card provided by one of Mary's partners. We also want to encourage you to go to the Florida Department of Health Office of Medical Marijuana Use website to learn more about medical marijuana use in the state of Florida and how to obtain a legal medical marijuana card. We also encourage you to go to the Florida A&M University's Mary website to learn more about this initiative, its educational programs, and additional information about cannabis use in Florida. Thanks, everybody. And thank you, Dr. Annabelle.
Thank you.